Okay, so this is the three worlds presentation analysis for Matthew 19, 16 through 26. So I'll quickly go over it. So starting at 16, then somebody came to him and said, "Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life?" And he said to him, "Why do you ask me about what is good? There's only one who is good. If you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments." He said to him, "Which ones?" And Jesus said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and mother. Also, you should love your neighbor as yourself." So the young man said to him, "I've kept all these. What do I still lack?" Jesus said to him, "If you wish to be perfect, go, sell your possessions, and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me." When the young man heard this word, he went away grieving, for he had many possessions. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, it will be hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than somebody who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven." And when the disciples heard this, they were greatly astounded and said, "Then who can be saved?" But Jesus looked at them and said, "For mortals it is impossible, but for God all things is possible." So if we look at the literary world, when analyzing the above pericope in Matthew, there are many ways in which style and usage of language at the beginning develop ideas that are later mirrored at the end. One of the first things that one notices in the relationship of the parties interacting with Jesus, in Matthew 19:16, somebody came up to Jesus and called him teacher. And later in Matthew 19:20, we see that he's a young man. Already, we have a scholastic environment of a teacher and a student. Later in Matthew 19:20 through 23, we see that Jesus is teaching his other students, his disciples. This is important because we can see the dichotomy of various results that would occur as a result of Jesus' requirements for salvation. The young man was told to sell everything and follow Jesus, to which the young man responded by walking away. So cut to the disciples, and we see that, and we have the epitome of 12 men who not only left their families, but their jobs, wealth, and possessions to follow and learn from Jesus. They stayed the course. So another echo of ideas that comes in the form of the old and the new. When approached about eternal life, Jesus tells the young man to follow the Ten Commandments, a mark of the old covenant that God set in place with his people. Then Jesus follows up with the requirements of the new covenant, things that Jesus set forth as part of his ministry to be part of the new path to salvation. Jesus reiterates these ideas in Matthew 19:26 when he says, "For mortals it is impossible, but for God all things are possible." Again, we have the mortal or old way, which had to do with atonement, ritual sacrifices, and we have the new way, which required Jesus' sacrifice, without which it was impossible to have eternal life. It still is. So then, in terms of the literary world, we also have the use of hyperbole that I believe Jesus used to further illustrate the way that things used to be possible for people to achieve, while the new order required supernatural resolve or abilities. Jesus first tells the young to do something easy, something he's probably already been doing, something that probably didn't even require sacrifice. Then he tells him to sell everything and follow him. The young man probably equated this with growing wings and flying away. And because it was something that it became something that he couldn't do on his own. Similarly, Jesus uses impossible imagery with his using the camel going through the eye of a needle, Matthew 19:24, an impossible feat. Though he follows it up with a caveat that even this is something that could happen with God's intervention. Okay, so moving on to the historical world. In terms of the historical world in the first century Judea, The implications of Matthew 19:20 are fairly significant. Jesus tells the young man to sell his possessions and give money to the poor. Society in that region and at that time was highly stratified, and the majority of the population was either lower to middle class with a fairly high incidence of poverty. Those fortunate enough to occupy the top 10% were able to afford a life of leisure and security. If this young man had followed Jesus' advice, he would have found his life changed in an instant. Selling everything would have moved himself into poverty. He would have been ostracized by polite society. He would have been ousted from his circle of friends and possibly his family. There was a stigma of being attached to the poor and lower classes, and those in the synagogues believed that them to be impure and even godless. Oftentimes the poor, they omitted to pay taxes and tithes for all the festivals and the myriad holidays that they had. So interestingly, as well as the fact that Jesus does first suggest the Ten Commandments, showing reference and reverence for the old law. The fact that the young man answers, "I have kept all these," 19:20, and that the annotations in the New Revised Version show an additional annotation that infers that he has done so from my youth, indicates that this was probably an observant Jew, one that would have observed sacred periods of the year, tithed at all the appropriate times, and considering that their status in society, it may have been a stretch for this young man to even approach Jesus, bringing the possibility of being ostracized in and of itself. So finally, the contemporary world. So these two world perspectives have meaningful correlations in the modern world. Our exegesis of the historical world has given us a perspective of what it might have been like to have been a young man who approached Jesus, and what it would have cost to comply with his commands to sell everything and follow him. Applying the literal text of this Matthew pericope enables us to understand the relationship that Jesus requires of us when it comes to following him, and that this student-teacher relationship is possible through the power of God. We also see that there has been a transition from the old to the new, the possible to the impossible, the law to Christ's sacrifice. Where do we go from there? Well, using a hermeneutic approach, we can take all of this and apply this to our modern day, and see that the more things change, the more things stay the same. The path to salvation is still the same. Leave your old life of sin behind, give away that which you cling to, and follow Jesus. Accept his impossible gift and a life for him. However, the stratified society of first century Judea pales in comparison to the global stratification of our modern connected world. Every country in the world has had a chance to hear the gospel, and yet the effects of the choice to choose salvation can have even greater consequences. Baptism in a small country Texas town might involve an after-party, while the same ceremony in Iran might result in a quick afterlife by way of execution. While a commitment to Christ might cause some funny looks from family members in one part of the U.S., it might get you excommunicated from one's community in Utah. So salvation is still the same in Jesus' day, and as in Jesus' day, and sacrifice, though slightly more complicated due to global scope, still exists as one chooses a life in service to Jesus. So is needle threading still relevant? I believe the answer is yes. Jesus' hyperbolic parable was meant to illustrate that all things are possible through him. Each of us encounters their own obstacles and seemingly impossible challenges, And we can still experience the same qualitative situations relative to ancient times. We all have the choice to occupy the role of a student and let Jesus teach us. We also have the ability to be disciples and leave our old lives behind and follow along the road with him. The question is, will we?